We get an idea of why Elijah has this nickname. It's 1 Kings chapter 18. Let me give you a little background, a little bit of a reminder, and then we're just going to watch the story unfold as we read through it. Now, Ahab is king of Israel. Now, 1 Kings 16, verse 30, tells us that Ahab did evil in the sight of the Lord. As a matter of fact, he had done more evil as king. He was the wickedest king up until his day. He'd done more than all the others put together. He was a vile, evil king who came into conflict with God regularly. And we see that because we see of his encounters with Elijah the prophet. Now, the Israel, this is a northern kingdom, Israel had been experiencing a drought for some 3.5 years. Now, no rain for 3.5 years. Interesting day to talk about no rain with all the rain we've gotten this last week and recently this year. But can you imagine going 3.5 years, no rain at all? If you go back 3.5 years from today, if I did my math correct, a fellow by the name of Barack Obama was still president of the United States. Now imagine going from that time until today, no rain whatsoever. You know, the gardens are sparse. You know, everything's just a mess. And Israel, especially Israel at that time, was very much an agricultural community. And so they're hurting. They're hurting bad. God is getting the attention of his people. And he's decided to bring the drought to an end. And he's going to use Elijah, the Mount Carmel experience, the confrontation with the prophets of Baal, with Ahab. He's deciding to use this to get the attention of the people, to bring the drought to an end and help them to understand once again that God and God alone is the one true God. Let's start reading. I'm going to read just a few verses and comment, and then we'll do it like that this morning. Beginning with verse 17. It says, when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" And he answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now, therefore, send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him." And the people did not answer him a word. Well, Elijah's challenging the people. He's bringing the people to a time of commitment, of challenge. Say, listen, quit playing games with God. They worship God a little, and Baal a little, and Asherah a little, and other gods. They just decide we can do whatever we want. That we'll depend upon God for our protection. We'll depend upon Baal and Asherah because they were fertility gods and gods of the nature. And they'll give us rain, which they hadn't. And he's trying to say, Elijah's saying, stop. Just stop this. He's saying, you got to make up your minds. It's time to make a commitment. Are you going to follow Jehovah God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Or are you going to follow Baal? Make up your minds. Now, what's interesting is when this story is usually told, or when we think about the story of Elijah and the prophets on Mount Carmel, we think of the fire being called down from heaven. We think of this confrontation, one man against 450 prophets of God, of Baal. But folks, the real point of this story, the real action in this encounter is not between Elijah or Ahab, Elijah and the prophets or Ahab. It's about the people of God. You're going to see this as we read through this story. Elijah gets everybody together by talking to Ahab. But at this point in time, Ahab just isn't even a player in this. Ahab's just the backdrop. He's just kind of the scenery. He's not really all that important to the story. Ahab the corrupt king of Israel, he's just the backdrop. We talk about the prophets of Baal, 450 of them. But folks, they're just props. They're just part of the scenery. The real event that's going on here is God speaking through Elijah to his people. And it said that. And Elijah said, at verse 21, Elijah came near to all the people and said to the people, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make up our minds. And the people said nothing. They had no response to Elijah at this point in time. But let's read on, beginning with verse 22. Then Elijah said to the people, even I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but the Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it in pieces, lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull, lay it on the wood, and put no fire to it. You call upon the name of your God, I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people answered, it is well spoken. The people finally speak up. Now, what's interesting here, part of what we see going on here is that Baal's prophets have been backed into a corner. Now understand, up until now, they've kind of had their way in the nation. The king is with them. Queen Jezebel has her prophets, but they work together. Asher and Baal are supposed to be consorts of one another. So they kind of get along. The prophets of Baal, the worship of Baal, they've been having their way in the land. They've got a corrupt government. They've got these people who worship false gods. They've got all the attention, all the power, all the authority. And God's people have been following them. They've got most of the people in the land, not all, but most of the people in the land have been going along with whatever the prophets of Baal said. They were the prophets that worshiped the God their king worshiped, Ahab. So they had their way. But suddenly the time has come. God's timing, God's plan, God's purpose is that this is going to come to an end. And God decides that it's time to stand up. And now God gives permission to Elijah to go on the offensive. You know, Elijah was waiting for God's directions. Elijah pronounced this prophet. He told Ahab there's going to be a drought coming. And it's not going to rain at all. The king said, just get out of my sight. And he says, okay, I will. I will come back until you call on me. And Elijah waited, and Ahab waited and waited. And Elijah was patiently waiting for God. The prophets of Baal are still getting their way in the land. They're still doing what they do. They still have the influence they have. They're still kind of leading the people astray. And Elijah's sitting back and being quiet. It's not yet time to move forward. It's not time for him to speak to God's people. It's not yet time for God to move. You know, Wednesday night, we looked at Psalm 130. And we talked about the seasons of life when God sometimes lets his own people stew in their juices. That sometimes we've wandered from God, and God lets us struggle for a while until he brings us back. And for Elijah, this was a time of waiting for and watching the people of God continue to neglect him and waiting for the time when God would let him move. And God would let him bring this drought to an end, bring the people back to God. Let me read you a little bit from Psalm 130, beginning with verse 5. It says this, I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than the watchman for the morning, more than the watchman for the morning. O Israel, hope in God, for with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him there is plentiful redemption, and he will redeem Israel from all his iniquities. Elijah's waited and waited and waited. And finally, God says, now it's time. So he goes up, he's on the offensive, he tells the king, get these guys together. And if you look, and as we read through this, you're going to see the prophets of Baal, apparently they don't have a choice. They've been backed into a corner. It's put up or shut up. You're so great, you're so powerful, God's about ready to move. Let's just see who's got the upper hand here. We'll pick it up, verse 25. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose for yourselves one bull and prepare it first, for you are many. Call upon the name of your God, but put no fire on it." And they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it, and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar that they had made. They'd worked themselves up into such a frenzy, they've hurt themselves. And at noon, it's been going on for hours now, folks. At noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, "Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened." And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. But there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. The story's clear. They had prepared their altar. They had put the bull. They cut him up, prepared him to sacrifice. And normally, of course, they'd light the fire and burn it and talk about how great Baal was. Well, they've been doing their normal thing, except Baal's supposed to send fire down from heaven. And it's fascinating. They part of the sacrifice and the ritual of this kind of worship was cutting themselves. They're crying out to Baal. They did it from early in the morning till noon, and Elijah starts egging them on. He mocks them. He's harsh with them. And he gets them to do all sorts of crazy things. And it goes on for several more hours. This isn't just a brief time. This is an all-day thing happening. Excuse me, I'm sorry. This is going on all day. And Elijah's kind of harsh with them. I mean, he mocks them for their beliefs. Truth be told, in their eyes, their God was not much more than a glorified version of themselves. You see what he said? Perhaps he's a God. He is a God. He's a God. So maybe he's musing. Maybe he's off thinking about something else, and he's not paying attention to you. And maybe he's off pondering the great things of life and the mystery of the world. And you just got to shout aloud and get his attention. Maybe he's going to the bathroom. That's what he means. He's relieving himself. That's what he's talking about. Maybe he's off going to the bathroom. Or he's on a journey. He's wandered away, so he's not close by you. He doesn't know what's going on here. Perhaps he's asleep and must be awakened. Folks, you examine the false gods of this world, and you'll find that the false gods of this world are simply larger-than-life beings who reflect the desires and wishes of their followers. All they thought of was gods. To them, gods were nothing but just human beings who were bigger, stronger, more capable, had more power, could see things. They were off somewhere in a distance. Folks, the false gods of this world are created in the image of man. Man wants to celebrate alcohol, drunkenness. Well, you create the god Bacchus, the god of wine. Man wants to be warriors and harsh and hard and wants to fight all the time and be warlike. You create the god Mars or Ares. Man wants to live a life of wanton immorality and unbounded sexuality. You create the god Eros. Or in this time, you have the god Baal and the goddess Asherah. And they'll let you do whatever you want. That's the false gods of this world. That's the kind of gods this world creates, folks. But in the beginning, from the beginning, God informs us that we are created in his image and not the other way around. And we're told that in Genesis 1:27. God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Elijah is merely pointing out the foolishness of the gods they have given themselves to, the foolishness of the ways of the world that they are following, by talking about them, their gods, as if it's just another person. He's pointing out the hypocrisy, the lunacy, the foolishness of how they've prioritized their lives and who it is they're following. But folks, there's something else we need to see in this. We begin to see in verses 28 that they're starting to cut themselves, as was their custom. You know, there's something in here that informs us. It's kind of under the scene, but informs us something again about the nature of the enemy, Satan. We talked early this year about the spiritual warfare and how Satan is the enemy of God's people. But you see, folks, I want you to understand something. As these prophets of Baal are working themselves into a frenzy, wearing themselves out all day, cutting themselves up, harming themselves, just driving themselves crazy, Satan is laughing with delight at them. Let's not kid ourselves. When Satan sees these followers of Baal doing what they're doing, he is pleased. He is the enemy not just of the people of God, he is the enemy of all people. Satan wants to see all people destroyed because we see what happens to his followers. They destroy themselves on their vain philosophies and their strange religion and their strange worldviews. Folks, we must never forget that from time to time, as we stand up to the world, as we stand tall for the things of the Lord Jesus Christ, as we point to the lunacy, the foolishness, and the hypocrisy of the enemies of God, that even when we're standing opposed to them, to their philosophies and to their anger and their animosity towards God and the people of God, our hearts must also ache and be filled with a sorrowful, Christ-like pity for them, for they are under Satan's sway, and Satan is just wanting to destroy them just as much as he wants to destroy us. Just as much. There always ought to be a sense of sorrowful pity in our part for them. That we see them and in our hearts and prayers, that though we have to at times stand up and say, no, that's not right. Life is precious, all of it. No, that's not right. God has a plan for marriage. He has a plan for the home. He has a plan for the family. He has a plan for the way this world works. Even as we stand opposed to what they would push on us and on this world, there's a part of us that must always remember that they're sinners whom Jesus Christ died for, and that Satan wants to destroy them just as much as he wants to destroy us. Well, followers of Baal, those 450 prophets, they had their chance. They took all day. It's coming up to the time of the offering of oblation. This would have been an evening sacrifice. They've been going at it all morning. Fire has not come down from heaven. They've had their chance. Now Elijah steps up to the plate. Beginning verse 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." And all the people came near to him. And he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench about an altar, as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed, a lot of seed, folks. And he put the wood in order, and cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. And he said, Fill 4 jars with water, and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, Do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, Do it a third time. They did it a third time. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with altar. Well, the time has come for the evening sacrifice of oblation of thanksgiving. Elijah carefully sets up repairs. An altar that had been set up there for God for years had been destroyed and left to decay. He repairs it. He prepares a sacrifice. And you know the story. He digs a trench all the way around it. And he starts pouring water over everything. Now, folks, sometimes we look at that and say, boy, that's just going to make it that much harder. When the fire comes down from heaven, it's going to make it that much harder for the wood to catch fire. And that's not the point. The point is they're at the tail end of a 3.5-year drought. Water is a precious commodity. They're having to ration water. The people are watching as they're pouring out water enough to take care of perhaps their own family. You know, my family could live off this for months or weeks at least. And they're watching this water be poured out on the ground. It's been 3.5 years since it's rained. And the sacrifice to God is not just a bull, it's that which they don't have enough of. It's giving of something that's precious. Something that they normally took for granted, but now they realize how important it is.